Breaking right now on Morning News Now, a critical bridge in Baltimore no longer standing. This incredible video shows the moment a cargo ship rammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge overnight, causing the entire span to go down. This morning, Maryland's governor is declaring a state of emergency following the bridge collapse. Take a listen to when first responders arrived at the scene.
Be advised, the entire bridge, the entire Key Bridge is in the harbor.
Right now, search and rescue crews are in those frigid waters looking for possible victims. Officials say they're searching for at least 7 people right now. So far, at least 2 people have been rescued. One of them hospitalized. The other was not injured. The Francis Scott Key Bridge, known to many as the Key Bridge, was Baltimore's longest bridge, about 1.5 miles long, and an important part of the Interstate 95 corridor running over the lower Patapsco River. Now investigators are looking into what may have caused this cargo ship collision. Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah Sellers is on assignment. Earlier this morning, the city of Baltimore gave an update on the rescue operations underway following the bridge collapse.
We were able to remove 2 people from the water. 1 individual refused service and refused transport. Essentially, that person was not injured. However, there was another individual that's been transported to a local trauma center that is in very serious condition. We are still very much in an active search and rescue posture at this point, and we will continue to be for some time. We have a large area that we have to search. This includes on the surface of the water, subsurface, as well as on the deck of the ship itself.
NBC News correspondent Ryan Nobles has the very latest from the scene.
And good morning from the scene of this bridge collapse in Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge entrance is right here behind me. It's obviously shut down now as rescue crews continue on what they are describing as a dynamic search and rescue to try and determine just how many people were impacted by this collapse, which happened around 1:30 in the morning. Now, what first responders and officials are telling us is that a container ship that was on its way to Sri Lanka slammed into the base of this bridge, causing it to collapse. And there is video. The moment this happened, you can see the entire bridge collapse into the river. Now, at this point, officials aren't exactly sure how many victims there are to this tragedy. At this point, they've only rescued 2 people, but they've continued a very vigorous search and rescue that started just as soon as the bridge collapsed and has continued on into the morning hours. Now, this situation has been complicated by a number of factors. First is the fact that this happened in the middle of the night. It's pitch black here in Baltimore at the time of this collapse. They've had a difficult time just trying to see exactly what was happening in order to find those victims and rescue them. And the other part of it is the weather. It is cold right now, in the 30s. It was in the 30s overnight when the collapse happened. The water temperature is probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 48 degrees, which means that if someone did fall into the river, they would not be able to survive for a very long period of time. Still, first responders, even at this point, are describing this as a search and rescue effort. They have been in the water all night trying to locate those victims. They're hoping as the sun starts to come up that process will be easier. They have aircraft, helicopters, and airplanes that are flying above the scene, helping them aid in that rescue attempt. But this is going to be a very difficult and lengthy recovery process. This is a main artery in and around the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. This is something that thousands and thousands of commuters use every single day. So that is certainly going to complicate things on a workday in this region as the area just waking up now to this tragedy. We'll continue to track and monitor all these developments and update you when we learn more information. For now, though, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you. And we will have more on the bridge collapse throughout the morning here on NBC News Now. In other news this morning, the battle over reproductive freedom is back in front of the Supreme Court. At issue is access to the most commonly used abortion pill, mifepristone, which has been widely used for managing abortions and miscarriages in the U.S. for more than 2 decades. At the center of this case, whether the FDA overlooked some serious safety issues when it made mifepristone easier to get, including through mail-order pharmacies. For more on this, we're joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian and Professor professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School, Michelle B. Goodwin. Thank you both for joining us. Ken, let's start with you. Take us through what we can expect to hear during today's arguments.
Good morning, Joe. Well, the legal issues in this case have nothing to do with abortion rights, but the implications for abortion rights are profound because as many as half of all abortions in this country are conducted through this pill and other medically approved options. And essentially, this is a case brought by a group of anti-abortion doctors, and it's worked its way here to the Supreme Court. The FDA and the regulated industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the doctors, are both on the same side here, saying that this drug is both safe and effective. At issue were some changes that the FDA made, for example, allowing it to be taken 10 weeks after pregnancy, up from 6 weeks, and allowing only one follow-up doctor visit instead of 3, and then allowing nurse practitioners to prescribe it instead of doctors, and then during the pandemic, allowing mail order distribution of the drugs, which persists to this day, profoundly expanding access. This doctor group, though, saying it impacted safety. That is very much hotly disputed. Most experts say that this drug is perfectly safe and effective, and the FDA is saying, and people who advocate for the FDA are saying that this case really threatens the way that the FDA approves drugs in this country, Joe.
So, Michelle, I mean, the head of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center in New York called this a uniquely important case, saying if the court were to rule against the FDA and the use of mifepristone, it would, quote, clearly bring abortion by pill to an end in this country. Is that what's at stake here?
Well, its implications are quite wide. In the Dobbs decision, the United States Supreme Court said that these matters would be left to states. Given that this was a case that was brought before a federal district court judge, which sided with those plaintiffs who are not all doctors, though they claim themselves to be. One is a dentist and another one has a master's degree in theology. So that's an important point to note just in terms of standing. But because it was brought before a federal district court judge, then it means that it affects the entire country. So in that case, the judge sided with the plaintiffs in very strong terms. What we have before the court now is not a complete removal of mifepristone from the market, but a rollback to what were the pre-COVID standards in terms of its distribution.
So, Ken, let's talk more about safety, which you mentioned. It's important to note the 2 studies cited in a Texas court ruling last year that claimed mifepristone could be harmful. They were later retracted. That was after the publication found, quote, fundamental problems with the study design and methodology, as well as conflicts of interest. How much of a factor is that going to be in this case? Is that a major blow to those who do want to limit access to this pill?
Well, common sense, Joe, tells us it should be. One of those studies was so deeply flawed because it measured emergency room visits after pregnancy and suggested that all of those visits were related to the abortion pill, which later reviewers found was just ridiculous. And so that should have an effect on the case. But unfortunately, we found a recent history in the Supreme Court of just wrong information being bandied about during these arguments. We saw it during gun cases where justices just adopted what were incorrect facts, wrong information, and stated them as they were true and even incorporated them into opinion. So it's really in question here exactly how this is going to play out. One of the big issues, though, before they get to the issue of safety, will be whether these plaintiffs can show that they were harmed. Lawyers call that standing. Whether they actually have standing to say that they were injured, that is one way the Supreme Court could dispose of this case without getting to the central issues, Joe.
And Michelle, I mean, obviously a lot at stake in terms of what kind of impact this ruling could have on reproductive rights, but there are other implications here, including what it could really mean for the future of the FDA, right? Walk us through that.
That's absolutely right. So I teach a course on biotechnology, bioethics, and the law, and have a case book that I've written in this regard. Consistently, over almost a century, the Supreme Court has deferred to the FDA's expertise, to the scientists there, to the research protocols. If, in fact, this case, if the Supreme Court allows this case to go forward, in the way in which the plaintiffs would like, then there are repercussions for vaccines. There are repercussions for COVID vaccines, given that there are people who deny that COVID exists and believe that COVID vaccines should not be in the marketplace. There are individuals who believe that children shouldn't be exposed to vaccines like smallpox and polio and believe that they cause harm. Potentially, this could mean that all other FDA judgments and regulations could be challenged by groups who forum shop for particular judges that they believe might defer to them, even if they would not otherwise have standing, such as in this case, where it is incredibly questionable the individuals who've been labeled as doctors, but who do not practice abortion care and are not physicians.
All right. Michelle B. Goodwin and Ken Delaney, thank you both. Appreciate your time this morning. Now, despite being banned in 14 states, some activists have taken it upon themselves to mail abortion pills to women who don't have access. But as NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns explains, that could all change depending on the court's decision.
In this basement in upstate New York, one group is giving abortion access to thousands in states where it's illegal. We're not showing faces because they fear repercussions.
Where's a lot of this medication going?
The medication is going to all the states that the pharmacy will not send to. So I would say the majority are going to Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Georgia.
New York is one of 6 states operating under new shield laws when it comes to telehealth, which protect providers doing this from prosecution for now.
How many prescriptions are you mailing out today?
Today we're doing 112.
Dr. Linda Prine prescribes pills from New York City.
What is the scale of this operation?
So before we had the shield law, we were mailing pills to the blue states. After we passed our shield law, the first month we sent about 4,000 pills into restricted states. And now we're up to around 10,000 pills a month.
Anti-abortion rights groups taking notice.
The fact remains that just because you are sitting in California does not mean that you are not violating the laws of Florida, Texas, and 30 other states. So I think they have a false sense of security about this.
But that access in question. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case that could prohibit prescription of abortion pills via telemedicine and prevent providers from mailing them.
What action do you want the Supreme Court to take?
We hope that the Supreme Court will agree with the 2 lower courts who have already found that it's likely that the FDA broke federal law and its own rules when it brought the abortion drugs to market.
I think what we're talking about is really ways to work around whatever scenario comes up so that we can continue to get these medications to patients.
And it's not just banned states. If the Supreme Court restricts access via telemedicine and via mail, it'll impact states where the medication is legal as well. Doctors tell us it'll result in longer wait times, longer travel times, and more cost for patients seeking care.
All right, Dasha Burns, thank you. It was a consequential day in the New York court system on Monday for former President Trump. He scored a win in his efforts to appeal a nearly $500 million judgment in his New York civil fraud case. He also knows the new start date for his criminal hush money case. Now, in that civil case, a state appeals court reduced Mr. Trump's bond to $175 million and gave him 10 days to come up with the money. As for the criminal case, the former president was in the courtroom here in New York when he learned his hush money trial is going to start on April 15th, just under 3 weeks from now. Get the latest from NBC News Channel correspondent Alice Barr.
A last-minute reprieve for former President Trump in his civil fraud case on a day when the New York Attorney General could have moved to start freezing some of his assets to pay a more than $450 million bond. The former president instead praising an appeals court ruling that slashed that bond to $175 million and bought him another 10 days to post it.
I respect the appellate division for substantially reducing that ridiculous amount of money.
A judge ruled in February that Mr. Trump was liable for fraudulently inflating his net worth to get better loans from banks. His legal team is appealing, arguing there were no victims and the banks were repaid. If he loses that appeal, the New York Attorney General points out he'll still owe the full judgment, saying he's facing accountability for his, quote, staggering fraud.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Also on Monday, the former president learned he will face his first criminal trial beginning April 15th in the New York hush money case. A judge rejected the Trump team's push for a further delay.
I don't know how you can have a trial that's going on right in the middle of an election.
Former President Trump is accused of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged affair with a porn star in the lead up to the 2016 election. He denies wrongdoing, repeating his claims of a political prosecution as the 2024 election heats up. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos for more on all this. Another busy day. So let's start with that appeals court decision on the civil judgment. Why did the court decide to cut it by more than half?
They didn't give a lot of reasoning, but Trump's attorneys had argued that the appeals court has a lot of discretion here. They can consider any factor, while the attorney general had said, no, this is an extraordinary circumstances situation. And apparently the defense's argument won the day. So the amount is reduced. And it's interesting because the entire purpose of this bond is to ensure that after the appeals process, years from now, that the defendant doesn't spend all of his money appealing the case and then have nothing to give the plaintiff. So by reducing it to $175 million, that really only guarantees that the attorney general can get $175 million. The rest of that money, if he can't get it today, it's doubtful he'll have it in 2 or 3 years when this appeal is over.
So, yeah, I mean, the New York Attorney General Letitia James says the former president's still on the hook for more than $450 million. Sure. Should he ultimately lose his appeal? What more should we know about that?
Well, then all that would do is the same process as would have started if Donald Trump couldn't have posted a bond, which is execution of judgment proceedings. And these are really difficult, really complex proceedings, even with simple businesses or individuals, with a complex layer of LLCs and other kinds of ownership, and the fact that how much equity does Donald Trump have in these buildings? How much does he still owe on loans? The entire process would not be as simple as just putting a padlock on Trump buildings by Letitia James. It's really a complicated process. Now, whether that starts in the next 10 days or whether it starts in several years, either way, it is a process. I've been involved in these cases. It's not easy.
Another part of this judgment was that he was barred from serving as a public officer for a company. There was a stay put on that yesterday. Does this mean that he can continue to run his companies? How does this kind of play out?
Technically, yes. When you stay that judgment was effectively saying thou shalt not be a head of a company. By staying that, you're effectively saying that, yes, he can continue to do that at least until the stay is lifted. And that's sort of to preserve the status quo while they're on appeal. So it doesn't just preserve that he has to put up that money. It also preserves the equitable remedies. In other words, courts can order you to pay money. They can order you to do or not do things. And all that is a stay of the part of the judgment that orders people to do or not do things, specifically to run companies.
Let's talk about the hush money trial. This is a criminal case. It was initially supposed to start yesterday. We have a delay. Now we know April 15th. How certain are we at this point that this is actually going to start on April 15th? Is there anything else that could delay it?
I'm not, but I'm just following my double down theory that I've been applying since last year, which is, you flip a coin, it's 50-50 every time. I'm just going to say heads every time and say there could be another delay, because about a month ago in this case, all the motions were decided and there was absolutely nothing left to stand in the way of the trial starting this week. And yet, something happened. Something unexpected happened in the form of a couple 100,000 pages of documents from the Southern District of New York. So, I mean, are the odds strong that it will start in a few weeks? Yes, but I said that a month ago about the trial date this week. In ordinary trials, things happen that push off trial dates. These are very consequential, the most consequential criminal trials, 4 criminal cases in American history. They're complex. Things are going to happen. So am I 100% that it'll start in 3 weeks? No, something could happen. Is there a strong possibility? Yeah, at this point, I guess.
We've got 20 days. We'll see what happens in that time. All right, Danny Savalos, thank you so much. Tensions between the United States and Israel are high after the U.S. abstained in yesterday's United Nations Security Council vote, which called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. With 14 countries voting in favor of the resolution, America's abstention meant that the binding resolution was adopted. The UN Secretary General welcomed the move and said the resolution must now be implemented, adding failure to do so would be, quote, unforgivable. But this morning, there are no signs Israel is planning to halt its attacks in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuked the U.S. for not using its veto and canceled the visit of a high-level Israeli delegation to Washington. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv. We're also joined by our White House correspondent Monica Alba. Good morning to both of you. Raf, let's start with you. Walk us through the reaction from Israel and from Hamas to this resolution, and what does happen if it's not implemented?
Joe, good morning. There was applause in the UN Security Council chamber yesterday as that resolution passed, a feeling among diplomats that nearly 6 months into this war, the UN's highest body had overcome its internal divisions, passed a resolution calling both for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate release of the hostages. But, Joe, there is no indication on the grounds that this resolution is going to lead to either of those things happening. As you said, Israel says it will not abide by this resolution, that it will fight on until Hamas is destroyed and until the hostages are released. The Israeli government furious with the Biden administration for not using its veto power to block this resolution from going through. Hamas, for its part, says it welcomes the passage of this resolution, but it is not committing to immediately and unconditionally release the hostages, which is what this resolution calls for. There is no real mechanism in this resolution to punish either Israel or Hamas for non-compliance. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations claiming this resolution is non-binding. Not really clear what she means by that. UN Security Council resolutions are considered to be international law. But in terms of avenues to really change the facts on the ground, to get those hostages out, to get relief to Palestinian civilians on the brink of famine in Gaza, it is looking like the best pathway remains those ceasefire negotiations underway right now in Qatar. Jeff.
Monica, let's talk about the White House. Why did the U.S. abstain this time, and how is the Biden administration responding to Netanyahu canceling that delegation's visit?
Well, the White House, Joe, said that they were very disappointed and a little bit confused as to why it did lead to that cancellation in the high-profile delegation that was supposed to be coming this week to Washington to discuss all of this. But in terms of their rationale for the abstention, they say it was over some technical omissions in the language, that there wasn't an outright condemnation of Hamas, which they wanted to be in the text, so it's not something that they could vote for, and that is why they decided to abstain. They also claim that this was very similar in language to something they had introduced last week, and so they thought it was close enough to what they themselves were proposing, and so that is why they went with an abstention so that it could pass and it wasn't effectively blocked. But here's a little bit more of how the National Security Council's John Kirby put some of that confusion diplomatically yesterday.
We're kind of perplexed by this. The Prime Minister's office seems to be indicating through public statements that we somehow changed here. We haven't, and we get to decide what our policy is. It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that.
So the U.S. insists it has not changed its policy there, and they also said there were some Israeli officials who were already in Washington with the Israeli defense minister, who was in D.C. yesterday for some meetings. He was at the White House, so they're trying to kind of back channel some of those meetings that were going to take place later in the week to be happening now. But the Prime Minister and Israel has said definitively they still plan to go into Rafah with a large-scale offensive, whether it has U.S. support or not. And that was supposed to be the whole point of this meeting that was ultimately canceled, to provide alternatives to that. So it really does leave things at a very tense place, and we're really just not sure what happens next.
I mean, yeah, Monica, where does this leave U.S.-Israeli relations? Is this the lowest point since the war began?
I mean, certainly the rhetoric that is coming out of the Biden administration is a lot more forceful, is a lot more blunt than it was in the days after the October 7th terrorist attacks. But they want it to be very clear, and the White House hasn't changed its position that it still fully backs Israel's right to defend itself. The major shift we've all been watching for, Joe, here is whether something would happen in this war that would condition aid to Israel, which would slow down weapons or not supply them at all, or again, add any conditions to that. And that That simply hasn't happened yet, but that's what everybody is waiting to see. And for now, the president has said he will still stand by Israel for its continued fight against Hamas.
All right. Monica Alba, Raf Sanchez, thank you both. Snow and severe storms possible across the east today. Let's get a closer look at your morning News Now forecast with meteorologist Angie Lastman. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. We've got a storm system that's caused problems in the past couple of days that continues to be an issue in the next couple of days. We've got the snow that we're tracking across parts of the upper Midwest. We've got the rain stretched from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf Coast, and this system is going to be on the move over the next few days. Here's the deal for today. Notice that front going to bring some shower activity to parts of the Ohio Valley. We'll see storms stretched as far south as the Gulf Coast and into the southeast, and some additional snow falling specifically across parts of northern Minnesota. As we look ahead to tomorrow, that front still working its way to the east. That means the coastal areas of the east are going to continue to see rain. We'll see likely some heavy rain focused across portions of Florida up into the mid-Atlantic. Now, as we look ahead to Thursday, that system, at least the center of the low pressure system, moves offshore, but we'll still be tracking a flood threat across this same region. Outer Banks to Cape Cod looks like we'll see those highest amounts of rain that bring us the concern for some flooding. As far as the snow is concerned, anywhere from 3 to 5 inches possible here as we get through the rest of our next 2 days, Tuesday into Wednesday. We'll slowly start to see that wrapping up. As we head into the evening hours tonight, basically afternoon to evening, a potential for some strong storms to develop, potentially severe as well. We'll see those wind gusts be the main impact for parts of the Great Lakes as well as the Gulf Coast, Mobile, Detroit, Cincinnati, Chicago, all included in that through this afternoon and evening. As far as our rain chances are concerned, they're going to be over the next couple of days, and that means we'll have a chance to pick up some good amounts in some spots. Notice the Big Bend area of Florida. We could see some isolated spots up to 4 inches stretching up into the Carolinas and up into the mid-Atlantic. That's where we'll see those highest amounts. Again, 1 to 3 inches more widespread, but a couple of spots a little higher than that. And on top of that, we've got some strong onshore winds. That accompanied by high tide times means that we could see some potential coastal flooding happening here over the next couple of days. Right now, 16 million people under these flood alerts, and those will last here through at least the day today. We've had a significant rainfall across the same kind of region, and that's partly thanks to El Nino. This is a typical kind of active storm track you see from parts of the south all the way up into the northeast, and that means that we've really started March with some soggy conditions in a lot of these spots. Cape Hatteras, Atlantic City, Providence, all dealing with wettest March on record. We have some top 5 wettest Marches as well, places like New York, Philadelphia, Norfolk, and we'll continue to see that rain in the forecast for the next couple of days, Joe.
How long do we feel El Nino for? Is that something?
Well, we're going to start to see that transition here in the next couple of months, likely as we get into probably summer and beyond, and then we'll transition into a La Nina.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Angie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.